hardest part isn't being alone. The hardest part is pretending you're okay with it. It's answering text messages with, "I'm good," when you're not good. It's sitting in a crowded restaurant, hearing laughter from every table around you, and somehow feeling like you're trapped behind glass. It's scrolling through social media at midnight, watching engagement announcements, vacation photos, promotions, smiling faces, perfect moments, and wondering why everyone else's life seems to be moving forward, while yours feels stuck in neutral. And if we're being real, some of you listening right now aren't just lonely. You're exhausted. Exhausted from carrying conversations. Exhausted from always being the one who checks in first. Exhausted from loving people who slowly became strangers. Exhausted from giving your energy to people who only noticed your absence after you stopped showing up. You know what's strange? Loneliness doesn't always arrive when people leave. Sometimes loneliness arrives when people stay. When you're sitting beside someone who no longer sees you. When you're working in a job that pays the bills but starves your soul. When you're surrounded by noise but haven't had a real conversation in months. That's the loneliness nobody talks about. Not physical isolation, emotional invisibility. And tonight, I need you to hear something carefully, because what I'm about to say might be uncomfortable. The season you're trying hardest to escape may be the season that's trying hardest to build you. I know that sounds impossible when you're hurting. I know it sounds ridiculous when the apartment feels too quiet, when the relationship ended, when the friends drifted away, when the future looks blurry. But stay with me, because there was a young man named Ethan, not famous, not extraordinary, just a regular guy trying to build a life. At 27 years old, he had done everything people told him to do. He went to college, worked hard, got the job, built the relationship, followed the script. Then life grabbed that script and tore it into pieces. Within 6 months, he lost the relationship he thought would become a marriage. His company downsized and eliminated his position. Half the friends he spent years investing in disappeared once he stopped being useful to their plans. And suddenly, every morning looked the same. Wake up. Silence. Coffee. Silence. Job applications. Silence. Another night staring at the ceiling, wondering what happened. The worst part wasn't the heartbreak. It wasn't unemployment. It wasn't uncertainty. The worst part was feeling forgotten. Feeling replaceable. Feeling like the world continued spinning without noticing he was struggling to stand. One cold evening he sat alone in his apartment. The television was on but muted. A half-finished meal sat on the table. Outside, headlights moved across wet pavement. Inside, everything felt still, heavy. He picked up his phone. No messages, no missed calls, no invitations, nothing. And for the first time in his life, he asked a question he had been avoiding. What if nobody is coming? Not what if things get better. Not what if I succeed. Not what if I heal. What if nobody is coming? What if nobody saves me? What if nobody notices? What if nobody fixes this? The question terrified him, but it also changed him, because for weeks he sat with that question. Then one morning something shifted. Not dramatically, not magically, quietly. He realized he'd been waiting for motivation, waiting for support, waiting for certainty, waiting for permission, waiting for rescue. And while he waited, life kept moving. That's when he understood something most people never do. Nobody was coming. And strangely enough, that realization didn't break him. It freed him, because once you stop waiting for rescue, you start discovering your strength. Read that again in your heart. Once you stop waiting for rescue, you start discovering your strength. Think about how much energy people waste hoping someone else will solve what only they can face. Someone to validate them, someone to choose them, someone to approve of them, someone to make them feel worthy, someone to tell them they're enough. But what happens when nobody does? What happens when the applause never arrives? What happens when the phone stays silent? What happens when the relationship ends? What happens when the people you counted on disappear? You find out who you are. And most people spend their entire lives avoiding that discovery. Ethan began taking long walks every morning. No podcasts, no music, no distractions, just silence. At first he hated it. The silence was loud. It forced him to hear thoughts he'd been outrunning for years. regrets, fears, mistakes, dreams he abandoned, truths he ignored. But something interesting happened. The same silence that first felt like punishment slowly became a teacher, because loneliness has a voice. Not the painful voice that says you're unwanted. The deeper voice, the honest voice, the voice buried beneath years of noise. The voice that asks difficult questions. Who are you when nobody's watching? Who are you when nobody's clapping? Who are you when nobody's validating your choices? Who are you when you're standing completely alone? Most people don't know, because they've spent their lives performing. Performing for family, performing for friends, performing for strangers, performing for approval, performing for acceptance. And the moment the audience leaves, they panic, because they never learned how to sit comfortably with themselves. Listen carefully. Being alone and being abandoned are not the same thing. One is a circumstance. The other is an identity. Too many people experience a season of loneliness and decide it means something permanent about who they are. It doesn't. A storm isn't the climate. A chapter isn't the book. A season isn't your life. And right now, some of you have confused temporary loneliness with permanent worthlessness. Those are not the same thing. Not even close. You can be alone and valuable, alone and loved, alone and important, alone and becoming. In fact, some of the most important transformations in human history happened in isolation. The world sees the victory. Nobody sees the lonely hours that created it. The world sees confidence. Nobody sees the years spent building it. The world sees success. Nobody sees the silent battles that came first. That's because growth rarely happens on center stage. Growth happens backstage. Growth happens in empty rooms. Growth happens in quiet mornings. Growth happens when nobody is looking. And maybe that's why loneliness hurts so much, because it feels invisible. But invisibility and irrelevance are not the same thing. The roots of a tree are invisible. They're also the reason the tree survives the storm. Right now, your roots may be growing. Slowly, quietly, deep beneath the surface where nobody can see. And because nobody can see it, you're tempted to think nothing is happening. But that's not true. Some of the most important work in your life is happening underground. Every difficult conversation you're finally having with yourself. Every boundary you're learning to set. Every unhealthy attachment you're learning to release. Every morning you choose to keep going despite the pain. Those things matter. More than you know. More than anyone knows. More than the future version of you will ever be able to fully explain. Because one day you're going to meet someone who's currently living through the exact darkness you're facing now. And your scars will become their map. Your survival will become their hope. Your story will become their evidence. Not because you avoided loneliness, because you walked through it. And that's where everything begins to change. And that's where everything begins to change. Because the moment you stop treating loneliness like an enemy, you begin discovering what it has been trying to show you all along. Ethan didn't wake up one morning transformed. There was no movie soundtrack, no dramatic breakthrough, no sudden success story. There were still mornings when the silence felt heavy. Still nights when memories showed up uninvited. Still moments when he reached for his phone, hoping to see a message from someone who had already chosen to leave. But something inside him was changing. The pain was no longer in control. The loneliness was still present, but it was no longer driving the car. And that distinction matters more than most people realize. Because healing is not the absence of pain. Healing is when pain stops making your decisions. There are people who spend 10 years trapped by a heartbreak that happened 10 months ago. There are people who sacrifice their future trying to resurrect their past. There are people who keep knocking on doors that have already been closed because they are afraid of walking toward doors they cannot yet see. Ethan almost became one of those people. One afternoon he found an old photograph buried inside a drawer. It was from years earlier. He was standing with friends at a lake during summer. Everyone was laughing. The sunlight was bright. The smiles looked effortless. For a moment he felt that familiar ache. The ache of comparison. The ache of looking backward. The ache of wishing life could return to what it once was. Then he noticed something strange. Half the people in that photograph were no longer in his life. Some had moved away. Some had drifted apart. Some had become strangers. Yet when the picture was taken, he had believed they would always be there. That realization hit him harder than expected. Not because it was sad, because it was true. Life changes. People change. Relationships change. Seasons change. And the suffering often comes from demanding permanence from things that were never promised to stay. Let that sink in. Some of your pain is not coming from what you lost. It's coming from your refusal to accept that it was lost. Some of you are grieving a version of life that no longer exists, a version that isn't coming back. A relationship, a friendship, a dream, a plan, an identity. And every day you spend trying to recreate yesterday is a day you're not building tomorrow. That doesn't mean stop caring. It doesn't mean stop loving. It doesn't mean become cold. It means stop building your future around ghosts. The truth is, loneliness often arrives when life is clearing space. Space for growth. Space for truth. Space for the person you're becoming. But because empty space feels uncomfortable, we rush to fill it. We jump into relationships too quickly. We cling to people who aren't right for us. We distract ourselves with endless entertainment. We drown our thoughts in noise, anything to avoid being alone with ourselves. But what if the thing you're avoiding is the thing you most need? What if this season isn't punishment? What if it's preparation? Think about that. What if life isn't taking something away from you? What if it's making room? Ethan began noticing patterns. Every major mistake he'd made over the previous 5 years had one thing in common. He made those decisions because he was afraid to be alone. He stayed too long, ignored red flags, accepted less than he deserved, compromised values he cared about. Not because he was weak, because he was scared. Scared of emptiness, scared of silence, scared of losing people, scared of facing himself. And once he saw that pattern, he couldn't unsee it. Maybe that's true for some of you listening. Maybe you've tolerated treatment that broke your spirit because loneliness felt worse. Maybe you've remained in environments that drained you because uncertainty felt terrifying. Maybe you've spent years trying to earn love from people who were never capable of giving it. Not because you're foolish, because you're human. But there comes a moment when you must ask yourself a difficult question. Is the fear of being alone costing me the life I actually want? Because sometimes, the cage door is open. The reason you're still trapped is because freedom feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliarity often disguises itself as fear. The greatest relationships are not built by people who need each other to survive. They're built by people who can survive on their own and choose each other anyway. That's real strength. That's real love. That's real connection. When loneliness is no longer your greatest fear, manipulation loses its power over you. Toxic relationships lose their power over you. The need for constant validation loses its power over you. Because you're no longer negotiating your worth. You're standing on it. One evening, Ethan sat on a park bench, watching the sun disappear behind the horizon. The sky was painted with orange and gold. Children were playing in the distance. Cars moved along the road. Life was happening everywhere. And for the first time in a very long time, he didn't feel abandoned by it. He felt part of it. Not because his problems were solved, not because everything was perfect, but because he realized something beautiful. The world had never stopped offering possibilities. He had just been staring at a closed door for so long that he missed all the open ones. How many opportunities are you missing because you're focused on what left? How many blessings are standing quietly beside you while your attention remains fixed on what you lost? How much life is waiting for you to look up? Months passed. Ethan found work again. Not immediately, not easily, but eventually. He started exercising regularly. He reconnected with parts of himself he'd neglected. Books he wanted to read, skills he wanted to learn, places he wanted to explore, dreams he wanted to pursue. And here's the part most people misunderstand. None of those things removed loneliness overnight. They simply gave loneliness less space to dominate his life. Because purpose shrinks problems, not by making them disappear, by making them proportionally smaller. A candle doesn't eliminate the darkness of the entire world. It simply creates enough light to move forward. And that's all you need right now. Not all the answers, not certainty, not perfection, just enough light for the next step. That's it. The next step, the next conversation, the next application, the next workout, the next sunrise, the next attempt, the next day. People overwhelm themselves trying to solve their entire future before breakfast. You don't need to know how the next 5 years will unfold. You need to know what you're doing today. Loneliness becomes unbearable when your mind lives exclusively in the future. When you keep asking, what if I always feel this way? But that's the wrong question. The better question is, what can I do with today? Today is manageable. Today is actionable. Today is real. And enough todays stacked together create a completely different life. There's a sentence Ethan eventually wrote in a notebook. A sentence that became a turning point. A sentence that changed how he viewed everything. He wrote, "The people who leave your life create space for the person you're meant to become. Not every departure is destruction. Sometimes it's construction. Sometimes life removes what no longer fits before it introduces what does. Sometimes loneliness is not evidence that you've been forgotten. Sometimes it's evidence that you're being rebuilt. Stronger, wiser, more honest, more grounded, more yourself. And that process is rarely comfortable, because growth has a strange habit of feeling like loss before it feels like progress. The caterpillar doesn't know it's becoming a butterfly. It only knows that everything familiar is disappearing. You may be standing in that exact place right now, watching old identities crumble, watching old relationships fade, watching old expectations collapse. And because you can't yet see what's coming next, you're tempted to believe nothing good is happening. But transformation often looks messy from the middle. The middle is confusing. The middle is uncertain. The middle is lonely. But the middle is not the end. Remember that. The middle is not the end. Not for your story. Not for your future. Not for your life. Every great comeback has a chapter where it looks impossible. Every breakthrough has a chapter where nothing seems to be working. Every strong person has a chapter where they feel weak. And maybe you're in that chapter right now. If you are, don't judge the entire book by one page. Keep turning pages. Keep showing up. Keep moving. Even slowly. Especially slowly. Because slow progress still moves you forward. And one day you'll look back at the season that nearly broke you and realize it introduced you to the strongest version of yourself you had ever met. That's the paradox. The version of you that emerges from loneliness often possesses qualities comfort could never teach. Patience, resilience, self-respect, clarity, depth, strength, the ability to stand alone without feeling empty. And once you learn that lesson, something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing people. You stop begging for attention. You stop shrinking yourself to fit into spaces you were never meant to occupy. You stop asking for permission to exist fully. You become rooted, grounded, certain, not because life became easy, because you became stronger. And strength changes everything. And strength changes everything. Because eventually life will test you again. Not maybe, not possibly, definitely. There will be another disappointment, another rejection, another goodbye, another season where things don't unfold according to your plans. That's part of being human. The goal is not to build a life where pain never visits. The goal is to become someone pain cannot permanently destroy. That's what this season has been teaching you. Not dependence, not fear, not helplessness. Strength. Quiet strength. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that doesn't need applause. The kind that doesn't collapse when nobody is watching. Think about a lighthouse standing on a rocky coastline during a storm. The waves crash against it. The wind screams around it. The rain strikes it from every direction. Night covers everything. And still the lighthouse remains. Not because the storm is weak, because the foundation is deep. That's the image I want you to carry with you tonight. Not a warrior charging into battle. Not a hero standing on a mountain. A lighthouse, steady, grounded, certain. The lighthouse doesn't chase ships. It doesn't beg ships to stay. It doesn't panic when the ocean becomes rough. It simply becomes what it was built to be. And because it stands firm, it helps others find their way. That's what loneliness can build inside a person, a foundation, a center, a calm certainty that says, even if everyone leaves, I remain. Read that again in your soul. Even if everyone leaves, I remain. That isn't arrogance, it's self-respect. It's understanding that your value does not rise and fall according to who texts back. Your worth does not depend on who chooses you. Your future does not depend on who stayed. Some of you have spent years treating yourself like a backup plan. Tonight, that has to end. You have spent years giving everyone else the loyalty you refuse to give yourself. Years believing in other people more than you believed in your own potential. Years waiting for someone else to recognize the greatness that was already sitting inside you. No more. No more waiting. No more shrinking. No more convincing people to see what they are determined to overlook. No more chasing validation from people who cannot even validate themselves. No more handing your self-worth to strangers. Take it back. Take back your attention. Take back your energy. Take back your future. Take back your life. Because the truth is this: the loneliest season of your life may one day become the season you are most grateful for. Not because it was easy, because it revealed who you really are. There are lessons abundance cannot teach. There are truths comfort cannot reveal. There are strengths crowds cannot create. Those gifts are often forged in solitude. Forged when nobody is cheering. Forged when nobody is helping. Forged when nobody is coming. And that realization no longer needs to scare you, because you've discovered something far more powerful. You've discovered that you are capable of carrying yourself. You've discovered that your heart can break and still keep beating. You've discovered that disappointment can wound you without defining you. You've discovered that loneliness can visit without moving in permanently. You've discovered that survival is not your limit. Growth is. Purpose is. Contribution is. Love is. And here's the beautiful part. The stronger you become alone, the better you become with others. Because now relationships become choices instead of necessities. Friendships become gifts instead of lifelines. Love becomes a partnership instead of a rescue mission. You stop asking people to complete you. You invite them to walk beside you. That's healthy. That's powerful. That's freedom. So tonight, after this video ends, I want you to do something simple. I don't want you to make a 5-year plan. I don't want you to reinvent your entire life. I want you to sit somewhere quiet, turn off the distractions, put down the phone, take out a notebook, and write the answer to one question. What has loneliness been trying to teach me that noise never could? Write honestly, not impressively, honestly. Maybe the answer is self-respect. Maybe it's courage. Maybe it's independence. Maybe it's forgiveness. Maybe it's the realization that you've been asking the wrong people for directions. Whatever appears on that page, don't ignore it, because your next chapter may be hiding inside that answer. And if this message spoke to you, take a moment to like the video. Not for the algorithm, for the person who feels exactly like you felt and needs this message to find them. Leave a comment and answer this question. What is one lesson being alone has taught you about yourself? Read the comments too. You'll discover something important. You're not the only person fighting this battle. You're not the only person rebuilding. You're not the only person learning how to stand again. And if you want more conversations like this, subscribe and stay connected. Not because I have all the answers, because none of us are meant to walk through life without reminders of what's possible. Most importantly, remember this: the silence you're afraid of today may become the place where you finally hear your own voice. The loneliness you're surviving today may become the strength you're proud of tomorrow. And the chapter that feels empty right now may be the chapter that changes everything. Because sometimes, the moment you feel completely alone is the moment you finally meet the person who has been waiting for you all along. You. And that meeting can change your life.